Greetings and salutations, and happy International Women's Day. I haven't quite yet discerned if this was an international holiday celebrating women everywhere or just an American holiday celebrating international women, but it's probably an immaterial difference. In any case, let's see who's in the chat. Hello, Christina, Emily, Kelsey Blaine Gibson, and Melissa Catano is here. Emily, I said Emily twice. Emily, how many times are you here? Hello, Claire Vere. Gonna snow here again, as if the forecasts are to be believed. Hello, Dari. I see several happy International Women's Days in the chat. Hello, Terry. Uh-oh. I'm getting the little spinning wheel of death. Okay, looks like everything is good and fine. It's just like spinning on my end. That freaks me out when that happens. Can everybody see and hear all right before we start the first bit of poetry? My mom is here. Hello. Oh, Marcia joined us. Hello, Marcia. Marcia, have you been with us on a Monday night yet? I can't remember which shows I've seen you to yet. Olive and Ray say hello. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up that everything is good with the feed. Good. I would rather it just mess it up on my end than on your end going out. Hi, Wolfus. Malika is here. Justin Cook, hey, what's crack-a-lackin'? And Patty Pinkstaff. All right. Roberta, hello. Okay, good. Emily can see and hear, so that's good enough for me. We shall proceed. So there are probably a few Disney folks watching, as are several Lewis Carroll fans. So so you'll recognize this opening poem. This is The Walrus and the Carpenter. God, I love this poem. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be. The sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If only this were cleared away," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, did you suppose," the walrus said, "that they could get it clear?" "I doubt it," said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things. Of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." But wait a bit, the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter, and they thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now, if you are ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing but, "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. Hello, Terry. And Svetlana is here. Hello, Malika, if I didn't say hello, Malika, a little while ago. Joanne King is here. Michelle Vanderpool. Well, those poor whittle quams. Yes, indeed. All right. So, this evening's first short story. This evening's first short story comes from a great writer. If you ever took just a world literature class, you would probably recognize the name Rudyard Kipling. And a single line from Rudyard Kipling. If you've ever heard the expression, "the dawn comes up like thunder," that's Kipling. Hello, Ruth Sanchez. Ruth broke up with someone with that poem. That's, I don't know if that's awesome, horrific, wonderful, tragic. Like any good poetry, it's probably a nice mix of all of the above. Is Bob Edwards in the chat? Bob, are you here this evening? No, Charity, that's not from the Jungle Book. That is originally Lewis Carroll. So that was included, or at least an abridged version of that was included in the Disney animated classic from the 50s? Is that when the Disney Alice in Wonderland came out? I think it was the 50s. Could have been the 60s. No, I bet it was the 50s because I bet Alice in Wonderland was also part of the original Disney opening in 1955. Well, in any case, we've got lots of Disney aficionados ruthlessly pounding keyboards as we speak, I'm sure. Greetings and salutations, Sam Pinello. Nice to see you again, man. All right. We had like 4 new people come last week that had never been here with us, and several of our regulars were missing. It was a Ships in the Night crossover would have been. So, back to Rudyard Kipling. This story is largely about friendship. The thing to know going in is that Kipling lived from 1865 to 1936. So I'm not certain when this story specifically takes place, but it's probably, let's say this is probably in the late-ish 1800s. So the important thing to know is that it takes place in colonial India. So you've got like white, very British plantation owners and local Indian workers, and a lot of the animal labor came from elephants. This story follows the relationship of 3 such folks, and I am including elephants as folks. This is Moti Guj, Mutineer, by Rudyard Kipling. Once upon a time, there was a coffee planter in India who wished to clear some forest land for coffee planting. When he had cut down all the trees and burned the underwood, the stumps still remained. Dynamite is expensive and slow. The happy medium for stump clearing is the Lord of all beasts. Sorry, Wolfus, this time it's not cats. The Lord of all beasts that Kipling said were elephants. Yeah, it's cool, man. He will either push the stump out of the ground with his tusks, if he has any, or drag it out with ropes. The planter, therefore, hired elephants by 1s and 2s and 3s and fell to work. The very best of all the elephants belonged to the very worst of all the drivers, or mahouts. And the superior beast's name was Moti Guj. He was the absolute property of his mahout, which would have never been the case under native rule, for Moti Guj was a creature to be desired by kings, and his name, being translated, meant the pearl elephant. Because the British government was in the land, Disa, the mahout, enjoyed his property undisturbed, and he was decadent. When he had made much money through the strength of his elephant, he would get extremely drunk and give Moti Guj a beating with a tent peg over the tender nails of the 4 feet. Moti Guj never trampled the life out of Disa on these occasions, for he knew that after the beating was over, Disa would embrace his trunk and weep and call him his love and his life and the heart of his soul and give him some liquor. Moti Guj was very, very fond of liquor. Arak, for choice. Though he would drink palm tree toddy if there was nothing better offered. Then, Disa would go to sleep between Moti Guj's 4 feet, and as Disa generally chose the middle of the public road, and as Moti Guj mounted guard over him and would not permit horse, foot, or cart to pass by, traffic was congested till Disa saw fit to wake up. There was no sleeping in the daytime on the planter's clearing. The wages were too high to risk. Disa sat on Moti Guj's neck and gave him orders, while Moti Guj rooted up the stumps, for he owned a magnificent pair of tusks, or pulled at the end of a rope, for he had a magnificent pair of shoulders, while Disa kicked him behind the ears and said he was the king of elephants. At evening time, Moti Guj would wash down his 300 pounds weight of green food with a quart of arak. Arak, by the way, it's kind of like Indian whiskey. Just go with that. And Disa would take a share and sing songs between Moti Guj's legs till it was time to go to bed. Once a week, Disa led Moti Guj down to the river, and while Moti Guj lay on his side luxuriously in the shallows, while Disa went over him with a core swab and a brick. Now, Moti Guj never mistook the pounding blow of the latter for the smack of the former that informed him to get up and turn over to the other side. Then Disa would look at his feet and examine his eyes, turn up the fringes of his mighty ears in case of sores or budding ophthalmia. After inspection, the two would come up with a song from the sea. Moti Guj, all black and shining, waving a torn tree branch 12 feet long in his trunk, and Disa knotting up his own long, wet hair. It was a peaceful, well-paid life, until Disa felt the return of the desire to drink deeply. He wished for an orgy. The little drafts that led nowhere were taking the manhood out of him. He went to the planter and, my mother is dead," said he, weeping. "She died on the plantation that we worked 2 months ago, and she died once before that when you were working for me last year," said the planter, who knew something of the ways of nativedom. "Then it is my aunt, and she was just the same as a mother to me," said Disa, weeping more than ever. "She has left 18 small children entirely without bread, and it is I who must fill their stomachs," said Disa, beating his head on the floor dramatically. "Who brought you the news?" said the planter. "The post," said Disa. "There hasn't been a post here for the past week. Now, get back to your lines." "A devastating sickness has fallen on my village, and all my wives are dying," yelled Disa, really in tears this time. I will call to Chihun, who comes from Disa's village, said the planter. Chihun, how's this man a wife? He, said Chihun, no, not a woman of our village would look at him. They'd sooner marry the elephant, Chihun snorted. Disa wept and bellowed. You will get into some more trouble in a minute, said the planter. Go back to your work. Now I will speak heaven's truth, gulped Disa with an inspiration. I haven't been drunk for 2 months. I desire to depart in order to get properly drunk, far off and distant from this heavenly plantation. Thus, I shall cause no trouble. A flickering smile crossed the planter's face. Disa, said he, you've spoken the truth. Eventually. And I'd give you leave on the spot if anything could be done with Morty Googe while you're away. You know that he will only obey your orders. May the light of the heavens live 40,000 years. I shall be absent but 10 little days. After that, upon my faith and honor and soul, I return. As to the inconsiderable interval, have I the gracious permission of the heaven-born to call up Morty Googe? Permission was granted, and, in answer to Disa's shrill yell, the lordly tusker swung out of the shade of a clump of trees where he had been squirting dust over himself till his master should return. O light of my heart, protector of the drunken, mountain of might, give ear, said Disa, standing in front of him. Morty Googe gave ear and saluted with his trunk. I am going away, said Disa. Morty Googe's eyes twinkled. He liked jaunts as well as his master. One could snatch all manner of nice things from the roadside. But you Fosby old pig, you must stay behind and work. The twinkle died out as Morty Googe tried to look delighted. He hated stump hauling on the plantation. It hurt his teeth. I shall be gone for 10 days, O delectable one. Hold up your near forefoot, and I'll impress the fact upon it, warty toad of a dried mud puddle. Disa took a tent peg and banged Morty Googe 10 times on the nails. Morty Googe grunted and shuffled from foot to foot. 10 days, said Disa. You must work and haul and root trees as Chihun here shall order you. Take up Chihun and set him on your neck. Morty Googe curled the tip of his trunk. Chihun put his foot there and was swung on to the neck. Disa handed Chihun the heavy ankus, the iron elephant goad. Chihun thumped Morty Googe's bald head as a pavior thumps a curbstone, and Morty Googe trumpeted. Be still, hog of the backwoods. Chihun's your mahout for 10 days. Now, bid me goodbye, beast after my own heart. Oh, my lord, my king, jewel of all created elephants, you are the lily of the herd. Preserve your honored health. Be virtuous, my king. Adieu. Morty Googe lapped his trunk around Disa and swung him up into the air twice. That was his way of bidding the man goodbye. He'll work now, he said to the planter. Have I leave to go? The planter nodded, and Disa dived into the woods. Moti went back to haul stumps. Chihun was very kind to him, but he felt unhappy and forlorn, notwithstanding. Chihun gave him balls of spices and tickled him under the chin, and Chihun's little baby cooed to him after work was over, and Chihun's wife called him a darling. But Moti was a bachelor by instinct, as Disa was. He did not understand the domestic emotions. He wanted the light of his universe back again. The drink and drunken slumber, the savage beatings and the savage caresses. Nonetheless, he worked well, and the planter wondered. Disa had vagabonded along the roads till he met a marriage procession of his own caste, and drinking, dancing, and tippling had drifted past all knowledge of the lapse of time. The morning of the 11th day dawned, and there returned no Disa. Moti was loosed from his ropes for the daily stint. He swung clear, looked around, shrugged his shoulders, and began to walk away as one having business elsewhere. "Hi-ho! Come back, you!" shouted Chihun. "Come back and put me on your neck, misborn mountain! Return, splendor of the hillsides, adornment of all India, heave to, or I'll bang every toe off your fat forefoot." Moti gurgled gently, but did not obey. Chihun ran after him with a rope and caught him up. Moti put his ears forward, and Chihun knew what that meant, though he tried to carry it off with high words. "None of your nonsense with me," said he. "To your pickets, devil son." "Harump," said Moti and that was all. That and the 4 bent ears. Moti metaphorically put his hands in his pockets, chewed a branch for a toothpick, and strolled about the clearing, making jest of the other elephants who had just set to work. Chihun reported the state of affairs to the planter, who came out with a dog whip and cracked it furiously. Moti paid the white man the compliment of charging him nearly 1/4 of a mile across the clearing and harumphing him onto the veranda. Then he stood outside the house, chuckling to himself and shaking all over with the fun of it, as an elephant will. "We'll thrash him," said the planter. He shall have the finest thrashing that an elephant ever received. Give Kalanag and Nazim 12 foot of chain apiece, and tell them to lay on 20 blows. Kalanag, which means black snake, and Nazim were 2 of the biggest elephants in the lines. And one of their duties was to administer the graver punishments, since no man can beat an elephant properly. The elephants took the whipping chains and rattled them in their trunks as they sidled up to Moti meaning to hustle him between them. Moti had never, in all of his life of 39 years, been whipped, and he did not intend to open new experiences. So he waited, weaving his head from right to left and measuring the precise spot in Kalanag's fat side where a blunt tusk would sink deepest. Kalanag had no tusks. The chain was his badge of authority, but He judged it good to swing wide of Moti Guj at the last minute and seemed to appear as if he had brought out the chain for amusement. Nazim turned around and just went home early. He did not feel fighting fit that morning, and so Moti Guj was left standing alone with his ears cocked. That decided the planter to argue no more, and Moti Guj rolled back to his inspection of the clearing. An elephant who will not work and is not tied up is not quite so manageable as an 81-ton gun loose in a heavy seaway. He slapped old friends on the back and asked them if the stumps were coming away easily. He talked nonsense concerning labor and the inalienable rights of elephants to a long nooning, which is kind of like the Hobbit equivalent of a second breakfast. And wandering to and fro thoroughly demoralized the entire garden until sundown, when he returned to his pickets for food. If you won't work, you shall not eat, said Chihun angrily. You're a wild elephant and no educated animal at all. Go back to your jungle. Chihun's little brown baby, rolling on the floor of the hut, stretched its fat arms to the huge shadow in the doorway. Moti Guj knew well that this baby was the dearest thing on earth to Chihun. He swung out his trunk with a fascinating crook at the end, and the little brown baby threw itself shouting upon it. Moti Guj made fast and pulled up till the brown baby was crowned in the air 12 feet above his father's head. Great chief, said Chihun, flour cakes of the best, 12 in number, 2 feet across and soaked in rum shall be yours on the instant. And 200 pounds weight of fresh cut young sugar cane therewith, then only to put down safely that insignificant brat who is my heart and who is my life to me. Moti Guj tucked the brown baby comfortably between his 4 feet that could have knocked into toothpicks all of Chihun's hut, and waited for his food. He ate it, and the little brown baby crawled away. Moti Guj dozed and thought of Disa. One of many mysteries connected with the elephant is that his huge body needs less sleep than anything else that lives. 4 or 5 hours in the night suffice. 2 just before midnight, lying down on one side. 2 just after 1 o'clock, lying down on the other. The rest of the silent hours are all filled with eating and fidgeting and long grumbling soliloquies. At night, therefore, Moti Guj strode out of his pickets, for a thought had come to him that Disa might be lying drunk somewhere in a dark forest with no one to look after him. So, all that night, he chased through the undergrowth, blowing and trumpeting and shaking his ears. He went down to the river and blared across the shallows where Disa used to wash him, but there was no answer. He could not find Disa, but he disturbed all the elephants in the lines and nearly frightened to death some gypsies in the woods. At dawn, Disa returned to the plantation. He had been very drunk indeed, and he expected to fall into trouble for outstaying his leave. He drew a long breath when he saw that the bungalow and the plantation were still uninjured, for he knew something of Moti Guj's temper. And he reported himself with many lies and salams. Moti Guj had gone to his pickets for breakfast. His night exercise had made him hungry. Call up your beast, said the planter. And Disa shouted in the mysterious elephant language that some mahouts believe came from China at the birth of the world when elephants and not men were masters. Motiguj heard, and he came. Elephants do not gallop. They move from spots at varying rates of speed. If an elephant wished to catch an express train, he could not gallop. But he could catch the train. Thus, Motiguj was at the planter's door almost before Chihun noticed that he had left his pickets. He fell into Disa's arms, trumpeting with joy, and the man and beast wept and slobbered over each other and handled each other from head to heel to see that no harm had befallen. "Now we will get to work," said Disa. "Lift me up, my son, and my joy." Motiguj swung him up, and the two went to the coffee clearing to look for irksome stumps. The planter was too astonished to be angry. Charity wants to watch Dumbo now. That's awesome. Charity, Jungle Book, and Alice. Alice in Wonderland. Indeed, Christina. This is oh, that's a good question. Svetlana, I don't know if Svetlana's seen many Disney films. That's not a conversation we've literally ever had. In any case, for those of you that have just been exposed to Kipling for the first time, I hope what you take away from it is the love between two characters who are not of the same species, even. Jack London does that with non-humans, as I have pointed out on many other stories. He will make a fully fledged character from a non-human. And before Disney made that like a normal thing in the 70s, I'm not even sure if Disney did that normally before they put out Robin Hood in the 70s. Rudyard Kipling made as well-developed a character out of the elephant as he bothered to make out of any of the humans. And, yeah. Good show, Kipling. Good show, old boy. Well, keeping to the Victorian, we shall return to Lewis Carroll. In 1871, Lewis Carroll wrote or published Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. This was the sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865. I think subsequent editions of Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, I think subsequent editions were edited down in title to just be called Through the Looking Glass. This poem is, of course, from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. This is Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mumraths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the claws that catch, the jaws that bite. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-trum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went glumphing back. And hast thou slain the jabberwock? Oh, come to my arms, my beamish boy, oh, frabjous day, calloo, callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mumraths outgrabe. Man. That is a poem I don't ever remember sitting down to memorize, but I simultaneously don't remember ever not having memorized, if you'll follow. So, our last story for the evening this is this one is a little longer than the previous short story. Oh, you know, I shouldn't forget to ask all the folks out there watching, please click the thumbs up. Please click share. Please click save. All of those things matter very much. And for that matter, I don't, in this show, call very much attention very often to the Venmo and PayPal info. If you can drop something in the virtual tip jar, it is very much appreciated. I get cold and Wolfgang gets hungry. Your donations go straight to said bills. Thanks, Mom. And yeah, I was watching Dari. Dari is just so Dari is on the street team of the Vaudacity Network. She is one of the folks that does promotions on the social media, and Dari in real life. That's just how I'm gonna start calling non-pandemic times from here on out. In real life, Dari is a Zumba instructor and has recently been doing Zumba videos, like just a song with a Zumba dance to it on Saturday nights as part of Paulie's online variety show. Well, she has been branching out as an entertainer lately and has started jumping into improvs And recently, one of the improvs is called Party Quirks. So she came into Party Quirks for the first time this past Saturday, and the character that she was randomly and unpreviously beknownst to her, she was assigned Alice as coming to the party. That was really funny. Oh God, Justin, don't cue Sarah McLachlan. He never goes so hungry as to make a Sarah McLachlan song for him. But Justin, if you haven't seen it, I did actually do an acoustic video of Sarah McLachlan's Angel. With the creative concept that I was going for with that video was, what would a cover of Sarah McLachlan's Angel sound like if it were on a Danny Elfman soundtrack? Particularly, what would it sound like if it were in Edward Scissorhands? Some psychedelics, and we ended up with a pretty decent video, I'd say. All right. But Dari, men bow, Alice curtsies. So the author of this last story I have for you all this evening is actually an author I had never heard of until this week, and I'm shocked because I love the imagery in this story. This guy paints pictures with words like Ray Bradbury. I love this thing. Hamlin Garland lived, well, way before Ray Bradbury, from 1860 to 1940. And if you ever saw Stand By Me, movie from the 80s, where four boys go on a quest, I really think that this story I'm about to read you must be the literary template for such an adventure. I know I'm going to hit that at least 5 more times before this story is over, so we're getting rid of the pop guard. The story is called A Camping Trip by Hamlin Garland. It was the 15th of June, and the sun glazed down upon the dry cornfield as if it had a spite against Lincoln Stewart, who was riding a gaily painted new sulky corn plow, guiding the shovels with his feet. The corn was about knee-high and rustled softly, almost as if whispering, not yet large enough to speak aloud. Working all day in a level field like this with the sun burning one's neck brown as a leather glove is apt to make one dream of cool river pools where the water snakes wiggle to and fro and the kingfishers fly above the bright ripples in which the rock bass love to play. It was about 4 o'clock. Lincoln was tired. His neck ached, his toes were swollen, and his tongue called for a drink of water. He got off the plow after turning the horses' heads to the faint western breeze and took a seat on the fence in the shade of a small poplar tree on which a kingbird had a nest. Somebody was galloping up the road with a regular rise and fall in the shadow, saddle which showed the perfect horseman and an easy rider. It was Milton Jennings. "Hello, Lincoln," shouted Milton. "Hey, Milt," Lincoln returned. "Why ain't you at home working like an honest man?" "Better business on hand. I come clear over here today to see you." "Well, here I am." "Let's go to Clear Lake." Lincoln just stared hard at him. "Do you mean it?" "You bet I do. I can put in a horse. Bert Jenks will lend us his boat. We'll put it right on in place of the wagon box. And we can borrow Captain Knapp's tent. We'll get Rance to go too." "Well, I'm with you," said Lincoln, leaping down, his face aglow with the idea. "But won't you go up and break it gently to the boss? He's got his mind kind of set on my going through this corn again." "But when'll we start?" "Let's see. Today is Wednesday. We ought to get off on Monday. Well, now, if you don't mind, Milt, I'd like to have you go up and see what Father says." "I'll fix him," said Milton. "Where is he?" "Right on up the road, mending the fence." Lincoln was so tickled, he not only leapt the fence, but he sprang into the plow seat from behind and started on another round, singing, showing how instantly hope of play can lighten a boy's task. But when he came back to the fence, Milton was not in sight, and his heart fell. The outlook was not so assuring. It was nearly an hour later when Milton came riding back. Lincoln looked up and saw him wave his hand and heard his shout. The victory was won. Mr. Stewart had consented. Lincoln whooped with such wild delight that the horses, swerving to the right, plowed up 2 rows of corn for several rods before they could be brought back into place. "It's all okay," Milton called, "but I gotta come over with my team and help you go through the corn the other way." From that on, nothing else was thought of or talked of. Each night, the 4 boys got together at Mr. Jennings' house, each one bringing things that he thought he needed. They never looked upon a sheet of water larger than the mill pond on Cedar River, and the cool face of that beautiful lake of which they had heard so much allured them. The boat was carefully mended, and Rance, who was a good deal of a sailor, at least on the small mill pond, as much sailing as you could do there. Naturally, Rance talked about making a sail for the little boat. Lists of articles were carefully drawn up thus: 4 tin cups, 4 knives and forks, 1 spider wrench, 1 kettle, etc. At Sunday school, the campers became the center of attraction for the other young boys, and quite a number of them went home with Lincoln to look over the vehicle, a common lumber wagon with a boat for the box, projecting dangerously near the horses' tails and trailing far astern. From the edges of the boat arose a few hoops, making a kind of cover like a prairie schooner. And in the box were traps innumerable in the charge of Bert, who was chief cook and bottle washer. Each man's duty had been assigned. Lincoln was to take care of the horses. Milton was to look after the tent and places of sleep. Rance was the treasurer, and Bert was the cook and bottle washer. He was also going to be assisted by the treasurer in his cooking deals. All these preparations amused an old soldier like Captain Knapp. So, are you gonna get back this fall? He asked slyly as he stood about, enjoying the talk. Well, we'll try to, replied Milton. Yeah, there. The craft stood, all ready to sail at daybreak with no wind or tide to prevent. And every boy who saw it said, I wish I could go. And the campers, not selfish in their fun, felt a pang of pity as they answered, we wish you could, boys. It was arranged that night that they were all to sleep in the ship that night. So, as the night fell and the visitors drew off, the four navigators went into the kitchen, where Mrs. Jennings set out some bread and milk for them. Now, boys, do you suppose you got bread enough? We got 12 loaves. Well, of course you can buy bread and milk, so I guess you won't starve. I guess not. Not with fish plenty, they assured her. Well, now, don't stay up too late talking. We're gonna turn right in, ain't we, boys? You bet. We gonna get out of here before sunup tomorrow morning, replied Bert. Well, see to it you do, said Mr. Jennings, who liked boys to have a good time. I'll be up long before you are. Don't be too sure of that. It was delicious going to bed in that curious place with the stars shining in and the katydids were singing. It gave them all a new view of life. Now, the first feller that wakes up, yell, said Bert as he crept under the blanket. First feller asleep, whistle, said Lincoln. That won't be you, that's for sure, grumbled Rance, already starting to doze off. As a matter of fact, no one slept much. About 2 o'clock, they began. First one, then the other. Say, boys, don't you think it's about time? Boys, it's getting daylight in the east. Nah, it ain't. That's the moon. Sure, bud. I'll hold your paw. At last, the first faint light of the sun appeared, and Lincoln rose, fed the horses, and harnessed them while the other boys got everything else in readiness. Mr. Jennings came out soon, and Mrs. Jennings got some hot coffee for him. And before the sun was anywhere near the horizon, they said goodbye and they were off. Mr. Jennings shouted a lot of directions about the road, while Mrs. Jennings told them again to be careful on the water. To tell the truth, the boys were a little tired at first, but at last, as the sun rose, the robins began to chatter, and the bobolinks began to ring their fairy bells. And the boys, they broke into song. For the first hour or two, the road was familiar and excited no interest. But then there came along new roads, new fields, and some new villages. Streams curved down the slopes and ran musically across the road as if on purpose to water their horses. How convenient. Wells beside the fences under silver leaf maples invited them to stop and drink and to have lunch. Boys they didn't know on their way to work stopped and looked at them enviously. How glorious it all was. The sun grew hot, and at 11 o'clock they drew up in a beautiful grove of oaks beside a swift and sparkling little river for dinner and to rest their sweaty horse team. They concluded to eat donuts and drink milk for that meal, and this gave them time to fish a little and swim a good deal while the horses munched hay under the trees. After a good long rest, they hitched the team in again, and started on toward the west. They had still halfway, 25 miles, to go. The way grew stranger. The land, more broken and treeless, seemed wonderful to them. They came into a region full of dry lake beds, and Bert, who had a taste for geology, explained the cause of the valleys so level at the bottom and pointed out the old-time limits of the water. As night began to fall, it seemed they had been a week on the way. At last, just as the sun was setting, they saw a dark belt of woods ahead of them and came to a narrow river, which the farmer said was the outlet of the lake. They pushed on faster, for the roads were better, and just at dusk, they drove into the little village street which led down to the lake, to which their hungry eyes went out first of all. How glorious it looked, with its waves lapping, and the gravelly beach, and the dark groves of trees standing purple black against the orange sky. They sat and gazed at it for several minutes without saying a word. Finally, Rance said with a sigh, "Ooh, wouldn't I like to jump into that water?" "Well, this won't do. We must set up a camp," said Milton. And they pulled the team where no one stood guard, and they drove along an old wood road to a superb camping place near the lake shore under a fine oak grove. "Whoa!" yelled Milton. All hands leapt out. Milton and Lincoln took care of the horses. Bert seized an axe and chopped on one side of two saplings. He bent them together. He tied them. He cleared away the brush around them, and then with Rance's help, he drew the tent cloth over them. This was the camp. While they dug up the bedding and put it in place, Rance built a fire and set some coffee boiling. By the time they sat down to eat their bread and coffee and cold chicken, the grove was dark. The smoke rose in a billowy mass, vanishing in the dark, cool shadows of the oaks above. A breeze was rising. Below them, they could hear the lap of the waves on the boulders. It was all so fine, so enjoyable, that it seemed a dream from which they were in danger of awaking. I love it when he uses his tail as a sleep mask like so. After eating, they all took hold of the boat and eased it down the bank into the water. "Now, who's going to catch the fish for breakfast?" asked Bert. "I will," replied Rance, who was a lucky fisherman. "I'll have some fish by sunup. Just you see if I don't." Their beds were hay, with abundant quilts and blankets spread above, and as Lincoln lay looking out of the tent door at the smoke curling up, hearing the horses a-chewing and an owl a-hooting, it seemed gloriously like the stories he had read and the dreams he had had of sometimes being free from the care and free from toil, far out in the wilderness. "I wish I could do this all the time," he said to Milton, who was looking at the fire, his chin resting in his palms. "I can tell better after a week of it," retorted Milton. To a boy like Lincoln or Rance, that evening was worth the whole journey. That strange, delicious hour in the deepening darkness when everything seemed as some sweet, remembered, far-off world. They were in truth living as their savage ancestry lived, close to nature's mystery. The pensiveness did not prevent Milton from hitting Bert a tremendous slap with a bootleg, saying, "Hello, that mosquito purtin' near had you that time." And Bert, familiar with Milton's pranks, turned upon him, and a rough and tumble tussle went on till Rance cried out, "Look there, you be tipping over my butter." At the last, the rustle of leaves over their heads died out in dreams, and the boys fell asleep, deliciously tired, full of plans for the next day. Morning dawned. When it dawned cool and bright, and Bert was stirring before sunrise. Rance was out in the boat before the pink had come upon the lake, while Milton was skirmishing for some milk. How delicious that breakfast. Newly fried perch, new milk with bread and potatoes from home, but the freedom, the strange familiarity of it all. There in the dim, sweet woods, with the smoke curling up into the leafy masses above, the sunlight just dropping upon the lake, the robins, the killdeer, the blue jay crying in the still, cool morning air. This was indeed life. The hot cornfields were far away. Breakfast having been eaten to the last scrap of fish, they made a rush for the lake and the boat. There it lay, moving a little on the light waves, a frail little yellow craft without keel or rudder, but something to float in, anyhow. There rippled the lake 6 miles long, cool and sparkling, and boats were getting out into the midwater like huge skimmer bugs, carrying fishermen to their tasks. While the other boys fished for perch and bass for dinner, Lincoln studied the shore. The beach, which was their boat landing, was made up of fine, varicolored boulders. Many of them were as round as cannonballs, and Lincoln thought of the thousands of years they had been rolling and grinding there, rounding each other and polishing each other till they glistened like garnets and rubies. And then the sand. He waded out into the clear yellow waters and examined the bottom, which was set in tiny waves, beautifully regular, the miniature reflexes of the water in motion. It made him think of the little wind waves in the snow which he had often wondered at in the winter. Well, growing tired of this, he returned to the bank and, lying down on the grass, gave himself up to the rest and freedom and beauty of the day. He no longer felt like making the most of it. Nah. It seemed as if he were always to live just like this. The others came in after a while with a few bass and many perch, which were beautifully marked in pearl and gray to correspond with the sand bottom, though the boys didn't know that detail. There were no large fish so near shore, and they lacked the courage to go far out, for the whitecaps glittered now and then in the midwater. The wind slightly kicking up, they took no notice. They ate every smidgen of the fish at dinner, and their larder looked desperately bare. They went out into the deeper water, all feeling a little timorous as the boat began to rock on the waves. Lincoln was fascinated with the water, which was so clear that he could see fish swimming far below. The boat seemed floating in the air. At times they passed above strange and beautiful forests of weeds and grasses, jungles which scared him, for he remembered the story of a man who had been caught and drowned by just such clinging weeds. And besides, what monsters these mysterious places might conceal. Other boats came round him. Sailboats passed, and the little steamer, the pride of the lake, passed over to the island. Yachts that seemed to the boys immense went by, loaded with merrymakers. Everything was as strange, as exciting as if they were in a new world. Rance was much taken by the sailboats. "I'm going to rig a sail on our boat, or I'm going to die trying," he declared. He spent the whole afternoon at this work while the other boys played ball and shot at a target, and by night was ready for a sail, though the others were skeptical of the results. That second night was less restful. The mosquitoes bit, and a loud thunderstorm passed over. As they heard the roar of the falling rain on the tent and the wet splatter in their faces, they heard the water drip-drop on their bread box. Milton and Lincoln, they wished themselves at home. It grew cooler toward morning, and the mosquitoes left, so that they all slept like bear cubs, rising fresh and rested. It was a little discouraging at first. Everything was wet, and the bread was getting a little moldy and tasted at the bread box. But the birds were singing, the sky was bright and cool, and a fresh western wind, it was a-blowing. Rance was eager to sail, and as soon as he had put away the breakfast, he shouldered his mast. "Come on, boys. Now for the boat." I guess not," said Milton. The boat was soon rigged with a little triangular sail with an oar to steer by, lashed in with wires. Lincoln finally had courage to get in, and with a beating heart, Rance pushed off. The sail caught the breeze, and the boat began to move. "Hurrah!" Rance threw water on the sail, where he learns that was a mystery. The effect was felt at once. The cloth swelled, it became impervious to the wind, and the boat swept steadily forward. Lincoln was cautious. That is all right. The question is, can we get back? "You wait and see me tack." "All right. Tack or nail. Let's just see you get back where we started from." See, Lincoln was skeptical of sailboats. He had heard about sailing just where you wanted to go, but he had his doubts about it. The boat obeyed the rudder nicely, came around slowly, started in on a new tack smoothly and steadily. After this successful trip, the boys did little else but sail. "I'm going up to town with it after dinner," Rance announced. But when they came out after dinner, they found the sky overcast and a strong breeze blowing from the southwest. Milton refused to experiment. "I'd sooner walk than ride in your boat," he explained. "All right. You pays your money, you takes your choice." replied Rance. Well, the boat drove out into the lake steadily and swiftly, making the water ripple at the stern delightfully. But when they got past a low-lying island where the waves ran free, the ship began to heave and slide wildly, and Lincoln grew a little pale and set in the face, which made Rance smile. This is something like it. I'm going to go out about a half a mile, then strike straight for the town. It was not long before he found the boat quite unmanageable. The long oar crowded him nearly off the seat as he tried to hold her straight out into the mid-water. She was flat-bottomed, and so as she got into the region of the whitecaps, she began to be blown bodily with the wind. Lincoln was excited but not scared. He realized now that they were in great danger. Rance continued to smile, but it was evident that he too was thinking new thoughts. He held the sail with his right hand, easing it off and holding it tight by looping the rope on a peg set in the gunwale. But it was impossible for Lincoln to help him. All depended on him alone. Turn it, shouted Lincoln. Don't you see we can't get back? I'm afraid of breaking my rudder. There lay the danger. The oar was merely lashed into a notch in the stern with wire. The leverage was very great, but Rance brought the boat around and headed her for the town, nearly 3 miles away. They both thrilled with a sort of pleasure to feel the boat leap under them as she caught the full force of the wind in her sail. If they could hold her in for that line, they were all right. She careened once till she dipped the water. Get on the edge, commanded Rance, easing the sail off. Lincoln climbed up on the edge of the little pine shell, scarcely 18 inches high, and the boat steadied. Both looked relieved. The water was getting this lead color, streaked with foam, and the hissing of the white caps had a curiously snaky sound as they spit water into the boat. The rocking had opened a seam in the bottom, and Lincoln was forced to bail water furiously over the side. Rance, though a boy of unusual strength, clear-headed and resolute in time of danger, began to feel he was master only for a time. I don't suppose this is much of a blow, he grunted, but I don't see any of the other boats out here. Lincoln glanced all around him. The boats, even the two masters, were in or were putting in. Lightning began to run down the clouds in the west in zigzagging streams. The boat from time to time was swept sideways out of its course, but Rance dared not ease the sail for fear he could not steer her. And besides, he was afraid of the rapidly approaching squall. If she turned sideways toward the wind, she would instantly fill up. He sat there with the handle of the oar at his right hip, the rope in his hand with one loop round the peg, and every time the gust struck the sail, he was lifted from his seat by the crowding of the oar and the haul of the rope. His muscles swelled tense and rigid. The sweat poured from his face, but he laughed when Lincoln, with reckless drollery, began to shout a few nautical meaning words. Luff your lover! Why don't you luff? Hard a port there! You'll have us playing on the sand yet. That's right. All we got to do is hard a port when the wind blows. The farther they went, the higher the waves rolled, till the boat creaked and gaped under its strain, and the water began to come in fast. Bail her out, shouted the pilot. The thunder broke over their heads, and far away to the left they could see rain and the water white with foam, but they were nearing the beach at the foot of the street. A crowd was watching them with motionless intensity. They were now in the midst of a fleet of anchored boats. The blast struck the sail, tearing it loose and filling the boat with water, but Rance held to his rudder, and threading her way among the boats, the little craft ran half her length up on the sand. As Rance leapt ashore, he staggered with weakness. Both took shelter in a nearby boathouse. The boatkeeper jeered at them. Don't you know any more than to go out in such a tub as that on a day like this? I expect every minute to see y'all going on over. We didn't, said Rance. I guess we made pretty good time. Time? You better say time. If you'd been 5 minutes later, you'd have had time enough. It was a foolhardy thing. Rance could see it now as he looked out on the mad water, and the little, flat, awkward boat on the sand just looked back at him. An hour later, as they walked up the wood, they met the other boys halfway on the road, badly scared. By golly, we thought you was goners, said Milton. Why, we couldn't see the boat after you got out a little ways. Looked like you were both sitting in the water. They found the camp badly demoralized. The blankets were wet, and the tent was blown out of plumb, but they set to work clearing things up. The rain passed, and the sun came out again, and when they sat down to their supper, the storm was far away. It was glorious business to these prairie boys. Released from work in the hot cornfields, in a camp on a lovely lake, with nothing to do but swim or doze whenever they pleased, they had the delicious feeling of being travelers in a strange country, explorers of desert wilds, hunters and fishers in the wildernesses of the mysterious West. To Lincoln, it was all so beautiful that it almost made him sad. When he should have enjoyed every moment, he was saying to himself, day after tomorrow, we must start for home. The happy days passed all too swiftly. Occasionally, Milton said, I wish I had one of Mother's biscuits this morning, or some such remark, but someone usually just chucked a potato at him when he'd said something like that, because such remarks, they were heretical. They explored the woods to the south. It was a wild jungle which it was easy to imagine quite unexplored. Some years before, a gang of horse thieves had lived there, and their grass-grown paths were of thrilling interest, although the boys never quite cared to follow those paths to the house where the shooting of the leader had taken place. Altogether, it was a wonderful week. And when they loaded up their boat and piled their plunder in behind, it was with sad hearts. It was late Saturday night when they drew up in Mr. Jennings' yard. But to show that they were thoroughly hardened campers, they slept in the wagon one more night. At least 3 of them did. Milton shamelessly sneaked away to his bed, and they did not miss him until morning. Mrs. Jennings invited them all to breakfast, and nobody refused. Land of Goshen, said she. You eat as if you were starved. We are, replied Bert. Oh, but it was fun, wasn't it, boys? Cried Lincoln. You bet it was. Let's go again next year. All right, said Milton. Raise your weapons and swear. They all lifted their knives in solemn covenant to go again the following year. but they never did. Of such changeful stuff are the plans of youth. Well, gotta thank you all kindly for joining us for Fireside Tales with Wolfgang, episode 23. Gonna leave the camera going just a couple minutes so y'all can bid each other adieu. And, yeah. So glad to see y'all joining. Love reading the comments after. Well, I'll see y'all folks down the road. Peace. We'll gather back together on Thursday night, 6 p.m. for Lovecast. Till then, I'll leave you with a roaring fire and a snoring cat.